Fall is undoubtedly the best time of year. Everybody knows it. Part of the reason is you get to eat a ton of cozy food and really enjoy it, and apple cider donuts are top tier cozy food. This recipe makes the most apple-y apple cider donuts imaginable, and you're probably not going to be able to guess why. Let me show you what you're missing. Most cider donuts start in the correct place, with the cider itself. If you want the correct layering of apple flavor with the correct texture, you need to reduce this cider down. This is going to remove some of the moisture and condense the apple flavor, but you really need to start with a good apple cider if you want good flavor. This is one that's from a local apple orchard, and be sure not to use a spiced one here. Start with 450 grams of apple cider in a wide pan over medium-low. We're going to slowly reduce it until it's 1/4 of the weight. Cider has a good amount of sugar in it, so don't leave this alone for too long. Make sure to give the pan a stir every now and then and lovingly reduce it. Depending on your stove, this could take upwards of 15 to 20 minutes, but it will reduce faster as the liquid cooks off. Remove this from the pan once it's reduced to about 120 grams and let it cool. Be careful with the stuff because there's so much sugar in it, the liquid can get really hot, much hotter than like water would get. This reduced cider is phase 1 of the apple cinematic universe. Phase 2 is even better. Now these aren't apple fritters, so I don't want to add apple chunks to the batter. In that case, applesauce is going to be our next best bet. Although if we want to incorporate this into our dough, we need to cook out some of the moisture, just like the cider. This is 260 grams of plain applesauce that we'll add to a small pot over medium. The reduction on this step is more about caramelizing the applesauce into a new substance, something more apple-y, sweeter, and much thicker. This is going to take about the same time that the cider does, so you could totally do this at the same time, same stove, just in a different pan. You're going to be able to stir it in the beginning, but at some point it is going to just turn into almost a dough. Once it's got that thick dough-like texture, you can remove it from the pan and let it cool completely before it gets incorporated into the batter. This is reduced down to around 65 grams. This applesauce and cider combination give these donuts a really nice punch of apple flavor. When we first tried these on like my initial testing, my wife and I agreed that it tasted like Apple Jacks, which I don't know to you if that's a good thing, but to us, that was a really good thing. It's got a really delicious punch of apple sweetness, similar to that cereal. There's like a good nostalgic flavor to them. To get tender cake donuts, we need a pretty wet dough, but if it's too wet, the donuts will fall apart in the oil. The challenge of these is striking a balance between a tender crumb and a sturdy donut that can stand the frying process. The truth is, I failed at this a lot. This was the hardest recipe for me to get right. I failed a lot at this, so I feel like I've got a lot of insight into how to make it work. This is a batter, so it's gonna start with our eggs. 2 large room temperature eggs that we can beat with white sugar, brown sugar, and vanilla. I wanted this recipe to be easy to make without a mixer because honestly, I kinda hate getting my stand mixer out and I don't have a hand mixer. So I just use a whisk and a spoon. Whisk all of these together until lighter and slightly fluffy. Just a minute of whisking is solid here. At this point, I like to get my fryer ready to go. So set a large heavy pot over medium-low and add in enough shortening mixed with vegetable oil to come up about halfway. Usually when I fry anything, maybe something like a chicken sandwich, I get about 1/3 of the way up just to conserve oil. But with this, you need enough space between the bottom of the donut and the bottom of the pan. This does need to come up to about 350 degrees Fahrenheit for frying, so use a thermometer to constantly check it. Just kind of like let this gently and slowly come up to temperature as you're working. We still have a few wet ingredients to work in as well. Add in your cooled cider and your cooled applesauce, sour cream, more on that in a second, and melted butter. The acidity in the sour cream helps activate the baking soda and begin leavening the donuts pretty much immediately. Whisk all that in until it's fully combined, and that's our wet mix completely taken care of. For our dry mix, start with 480 grams of all-purpose flour. For leavening, we're gonna add 8 grams of baking powder and 5 grams of baking soda, along with 4 grams of salt. To give us that classic, beautiful, warm autumnal flavor, add in 2.5 grams of cinnamon, about 0.75 grams of nutmeg, and 0.75 grams of cardamom. By the way, all these measurements are in the description, including them in cups and teaspoons. This is basically like 1 teaspoon of cinnamon along with 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg and cardamom. Mix this together until all of these spices are fully incorporated. If you've got like a secret spice that you like in your autumn dishes, go ahead and add it. You could probably also just use like pumpkin pie spice and get away with that. When you're ready to go and the fryer's all set, add your dry mix into your wet and begin stirring to combine. Because we aren't using a mixer, it's a little harder to overwork the batter. We need to get all the flour incorporated, but as I mentioned, you don't want to overwork it. So don't go too far after you see there's not any more flour. One of the keys to good batter making is doing as much mixing as you can while the two mixes are separate. You can mix as much as you want until the dry hits the wet. That's because the gluten is going to start developing as soon as that happens. To minimize gluten's impact on the final texture, make sure that the wet and dry are totally mixed before they're incorporated. Put a piece of parchment paper on a sheet tray so you've got a landing spot for your cut donuts, and you do need donut cutters. I'll link to these ones down below. They've got like a good standard donut size one, and I like the smaller one as well. That way you can get some like small mini donuts too. To prep for rolling these out, get a bunch of flour down on your surface and have a little bowl of flour nearby handy. Lay your mixed batter onto your floured surface and flour the top of the batter immediately so it's easier to roll. This is really easy to work and move around, but it can start to stick if you're not careful. Roll the dough out to 1/2 inch thick and then grab your cutters. Again, I like to work fast so there's no chance for it to stick. If the dough sticks, you're pretty much screwed and you have to re-roll it, which creates more gluten and ultimately a tougher donut. Punch out the donut holes and set these aside for the first fry. I prefer to do these first just so I can confirm the oil temp and so I have something to snack on while I fry them. It's easier to do the first cut, then move the donut to the parchment and then cut out the center hole. It just keeps stickage to a minimum that way. By the way, this makes somewhere close to 12 donuts depending on how much you want to re-roll your dough and roll it out and cut them again. You can totally do this a couple times just to get more donuts out of it. You don't want to waste the batter, but at a certain point you've sort of overworked it to a point where they're going to be really, really tough. So if you're going to do that, just save those last like cut donuts maybe for you and your family if you plan on giving these to people. Or if you want to keep the best for yourself, you can totally do that, but I just think donuts are an important thing to share with others, so give the best to the people around you. I don't know, I feel like that feels like common sense, but you never know. The donut holes take about 90 seconds to cook. They're really easy to just roll around in the oil until they're golden brown. You can just take them out and let them cool, that way you've got something to snack on while you fry your donuts. So now it's on to the main event. If your oil's up to 350 Fahrenheit, you're good to gently slide these into the oil. They're gonna sink to the bottom, but then the baking powder and soda kick in and give the donut a rise. You don't want it sitting on the bottom for too much time because then it's gonna absorb way too much oil that way. About 60 to 70 seconds of frying on the first side of your donuts should get you a set crust and allow you to flip them without falling apart. One thing I ran into a lot while testing is the donuts falling apart while trying to flip them. If you don't let them set enough, they can fall apart, but you don't want them too dark on that first side, something I let happen here by accident. One of the tricks that helps a lot is using one of these spiders to flip the donuts. A spatula is what I used in testing, but it meant that sometimes the donut would slide around and it'd be difficult to flip. The spider allows you to fully get under the donut and flip it really easily. This recipe yields a nice crunchy exterior and a soft cakey interior, something I really love in a cake donut. As I mentioned though, I definitely got these a little too crunchy while messing around with some lighting stuff. These were still absolutely delicious, but I don't want to like fret with you guys and tell you these are perfect and you want this color. Honestly, this was a little too dark for even what I like, but that's just kind of how it goes sometimes, especially when you're frying and something like 10 seconds can make a big difference in the color of a dish. That's totally okay though, because these are still better than any store-bought cider donut by miles. Let the fryer come back up to temperature between batches, that way they don't absorb too much oil. If it's around 320 Fahrenheit or lower, the donuts don't push water out faster than the oil enters the batter, so you end up with a really dense, oily donut. Let these cool on a wire rack while you work through each batch. These need to be a little warm when we coat them in cinnamon sugar, but you don't want them too hot to handle. Fall has always been a special time for Megan Kay and I. It's when we first started dating back in, 2014. It's when we got engaged, it's when we moved to Seattle, and it's just all around our favorite time of year. This fall, we're celebrating a new milestone, which is 6,000 subscribers on this channel. A year ago, that really felt like an insurmountable option to even get to. The growth this year has been insane and tremendous, and I owe it all really to you guys. If you saw my video about leaving my job for YouTube, you know that honestly, I kind of jumped the gun. I did it before it was a full sustainable project. I'm really, really glad I did it, but it's always felt like the pressure is on for me to make this thing successful. So all that to say, thank you all so much for being here and helping come alongside me in this journey. I just feel like this is a really, really special fall and kind of a turning point in the channel for me. So for everybody that's here before this video comes out, like, cheers to you guys, and I really, really appreciate it. Back to what's really important here, look at these crisp, appley beauties. The secret to good cinnamon sugar is a pinch of kosher salt. This is literally like 100 grams of white sugar with about 5 grams of cinnamon and then a big pinch of salt. Everybody I gave these to commented on how nice it was to have a little bit of salt in that exterior crunch. These are so fluffy and extra appley from that cooked down applesauce that we made. Now it's nice because I know how to make these all year round. I don't have to just wait for fall for it. It's the time of year when cider is the best, but honestly, because of the applesauce, you can make this all year round and have a great time because of it. Enjoy these while they're warm and toasty with a cup of coffee for like perfect Northwest fall vibes. These are exactly what you want when you think of an apple cider donut. Something that's got a crunch on the exterior, soft, pillowy, cakey interior, and autumnal spices that just really, really warm your soul. Massive shout out to the amazing people supporting me directly on Patreon through patreon.com/CameronMarty. They get some cool benefits for supporting the channel, and they're part of the reason why I've been able to continue making videos throughout this whole time. So check it out and consider becoming a patron. You can also support the channel by subscribing and liking the video if you want to tell YouTube to show you more content like this. Now, enough on sweets. If you need something savory for dinner, check out last week's video about homemade chorizo molitas. These are really, really well spiced and super, super, super delicious. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks to everybody who's come alongside this journey with me. Cheers.